So, hello and welcome to our very first Installer Leaders Summit, taking place alongside the InstallerSHOW 2021 itself. Your chair for the next 60 minutes, my name's Jim McClelland, I'm founder and editor of SUSMeme and I'm head of content with Installer sister brand Elemental. The industry leaders joining me on our inaugural panel today are Arntzen, CEO Worcester Bosch, Klaus, MD Vaillant, and Nick Wilson, Group Commercial Director at Baxi Heating. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the summit and the show on behalf of the team at Installer.
Thank you.
Essential reading for heating, plumbing and renewables professionals. So, we've got a lot to get through today, so a very brief intro from me. The Installer Leaders Summit. In the wake of Brexit, it's been a uniquely challenging year for the captains of industry tasked with charting a course through the waves of post-pandemic disruption. Yet, as COP26 looms large on the horizon, there's real opportunity ahead for sustainable growth. This is the clean and green future of low carbon technologies and smart solutions for a net zero world. Whether you're working in heating, plumbing, engineering, renewables, electricity, there is business to be won in markets new and old. So the purpose of this high-level debate series is to set out the shape of things to come. On the agenda for discussion, cutting across all trades and technologies, the topics ranging from policy and regulation, innovation, investment, jobs and skills. And so in a spirit of collaboration, this forum for frank and open debate brings together business leaders and industry giants literally around a table to discuss the burning issues of the day. It's not about any one product or brand, it's sector-wide, it's strategic, and this is where the industry gets to hear from those who break the mould and make the market. This is the Installer Leaders Summit, recorded live and exclusive at the InstallerSHOW. Right, let the debate begin. So, the format for the hour. We've broken the debate down into 4 key segments: big picture, change, progress and growth, each around 15 minutes with 2 questions. As interactive and open as possible, but for the sake of balance and flow, I'll nominate one panellist to kick us off for each segment, after which just jump in. Final round, pure free-for-all, so fingers on buzzers. So, the first question, and we are not starting with an easy one, it'll be Carl to starters. It's big picture, it's climate, COVID and Brexit. So a bit of context. June 2019, UK government set a net zero target for greenhouse gas emissions with a deadline date of 2050. However, in that same year, building sector emissions hit record highs, accounting for 38% of all energy related CO2. That's the dilemma we're facing. So, the first question for you, Carl, is are we on target for net zero? Can we decarbonise future growth?
And how long have we got for this topic, did you say? It's, as you say, it's the topic of today and the moment, isn't it? And I think in terms of timing, there's been, I think, a really noticeable increase in the debate on these issues. We're still awaiting 1 or 2 government white papers, particularly the heat and building strategy paper. But I think from my point of view, we now need to get on with it. I think we've been talking for quite a while. It's now becoming very close time to action. When you think about a domestic boiler has a life cycle of, let's say on average, 12 to 15 years. So when you put it in that context, you know, we've only got 30 years left to start hitting this challenge. So I think we need to get on with it. We need to now show some action. And for me, one of the areas that I think we could do very quickly is around new houses, new build. And I'm sure we all do interact with government regularly. You know, why are we waiting until 2025 to build net zero homes? Why are we not pushing that forward at the earliest opportunity? And as I always say, a house built and sold today, in principle, will have to be refurbished again before 2050 to hit those targets. So I think it's now time for action and we need to start accelerating some of the things we're doing.
Could I just ask you a follow-up? Do you feel that 2050 target is galvanising, or is it so far away that without a real ladder of interim targets, there's a certain inertia?
I think it's starting to be galvanised for all the reasons that I've just said. You know, I mean, it's time is pressing. We're in 2021, almost 2022. So, you know, that time is on the horizon now, and I think action is starting to galvanise, but we really do need to get some concrete activities going, and pretty soon.
Do you see similarly some momentum?
I would agree, and we all experience it in the last 2 years or 3 years. The discussion about sustainability and climate neutrality has increased tremendously. I mean, we really see it's not lip service anymore, and to a degree, the industry and our industry is ahead of the game. We have the solutions already in our pipeline, whether ready or in our R&D labs. And we are waiting basically for clear political statements, and the strategy we are waiting eagerly should give us that. And there is no silver bullet to solve everything, but the new build definitely is the easiest to convert market segment. And also there we have technologies already here to start tomorrow. And we'll eagerly wait clear political strategy so that we have a firm base to continue our investments, because we did invest already without a clear target.
And Nick, I see you nodding. Are you in agreement? But do you think we need to wait for that signal from government?
I think there's a lot of hypothesis around the moment, and I think the challenge is, and I think as Carl said, and Klaus, how do you bring that into activity, which is very much the new build sector? I think one of the bigger probably concerns or worry beads that we have is more around, if you look at the existing housing stock out there, so the 28 million homes, because 80% of the houses being built today are ones that will have to be net zero in 2050. So, as you say, the stuff that's in the foresight and coming, we need to get ready. But very much so, we might have old homes that people live in here, older buildings, etc. How and what technologies? And actually, I think the other challenge that we face as an industry is, and Klaus just said, there isn't a silver bullet, there isn't one technology, and I think we're developing a suite of solutions, because there isn't a single solution for all of the housing types, all of the building fabrics. So I think that's quite key as well, and I think government's white papers will hopefully add some clarity, and we can then dampen down some of the different perspectives that create a lot of noise in the marketplace.
That's a nice point, and it brings me on in a sense, if we're looking at those longer term targets around net zero, in a way we would never choose to start from here, because of course we're coming off the back of COVID and Brexit. So the second question really is, we know it's been said 99.9% of contracting businesses in the wider UK construction sector are SMEs, and we know how vulnerable they are on cash flow. So the second question is, how resilient are industry supply chains to the issues created by COVID and Brexit?
Yeah, and I think the construction industry, the plumbing and heating industry is not isolated away from any of this, and we've seen the issues over the weekend with petrol availability, diesel availability. I think, and we've all spent the last 20 years developing just-in-time supply chains, and we all participating in those global supply chains now. So the UK is not isolated from these things. The issues around tanker driver shortages is a European problem. It's not just a UK problem. And the supply chain issues are global. They're not just UK specific. And therefore, as a heating industry, we're not isolated off from any of the general supply chain economic challenges that currently exist. So, we're not isolated away from it. We're right in the thick of it. Product availability is challenged more than it has been for the last decade, I would say. And we're all individually fighting through those supply chains, battling our way through. Every day a new challenge seems to pop up here and there. It's annoying, it's frustrating, but we've got to now adjust ourselves, because this is probably going to be with us for at least another 12 months.
Yeah. Maybe I could ask, in that respect then, maybe, obviously part of this whole resilience factor is confidence and the perception of confidence. So we can all see the problems, but how much would you send out signals of confidence to the wider market that you are resilient and you can manage these challenges?
I would say our industry is almost a blessed industry when it comes to the bigger picture. Right? I mean, I only see growth in our industry because we are the solution to a main and the big problem. We have managed pretty well the last almost 2 years under Brexit conditions as well as COVID conditions, increased stock levels with a cost burden, of course. We also experienced quite significant cost increases on components, logistic costs. Delivery times are expanding, customs duty issues which we haven't had before. So there are a lot of issues we are facing, and I think we will be faced for an inflationary period of at least 2 to 4 years where these costs will be absorbed by the market in the future. But the big picture is that we are working in an industry which is part of the solution or the solution to all the problems we discussed before.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting. Both gents have just mentioned some challenges, and I think it's fair to say probably in every business we're very focused on the supply chain, the continuity of supply, the resilience. I think the other bit that comes, because you've come from Brexit, you've then had COVID, certainly we have invested a lot more in our working capital and making sure we are insulated to the challenges we face. And I think if we had the incident that we have at the moment with driver shortage, temporary staff and things like that, and the supply of materials and componentry, then it might have been bigger because we have been working towards it. Let's be honest, Brexit was the forever coming thing. We had 4 attempts at it, so it meant you had 4 attempts at actually being ready. And I think that followed by COVID, and also the dynamic of change, and we talk about it later on, but I think society at a macro level, we've changed a lot about our ability to react and flex. But I think it's really important. I think the shortage of fuel today, which is very topical, there will be something else tomorrow. I think society now has to accept that whether it be children testing on a daily basis and classrooms closing for COVID, society has changed forever, and I think in our industry we have to keep adapting and changing, and that's quite important. And I think certainly as Baxi, we've put a lot of time and effort into thinking about what security looks like and resilience looks like from our supply chain on a local and global level as well.
So what I'm hearing is you're talking more about resilience in terms of agility than just putting up walls and building bigger defences. You're talking about being agile as very much part of the solution.
Absolutely, because I think like a river, you can put a flood break on a river, and all you do is push the river further down and you flood somewhere else. And it's the same, you can put a defensive wall here today, but the landscape will change. And I think actually in our daily lives as well as our working lives, we have to become more agile and the ability to move and react to certain situations, because building big defences over X or Y, I don't think will make you future-proof.
Excellent. And that kind of brings us nicely to question 2, as you anticipate, which is about change. And change in terms of innovation, scale, disruption. So a bit of context here. It'll be Klaus to kick us off on this one, but the UK government's just announced £450 million fund to unlock cutting-edge innovation across gas and electricity networks to help turn the UK into the Silicon Valley of energy. But Klaus, is innovation key to industry success, or is it actually more a matter of scale? Have we got enough new stuff? Do we just need to roll it out? And if I could push you to choose one, I know it's both, but which?
Oh, you put the answer in my mouth.
Exactly. Yeah, innovation or scale.
Yeah. If I have to choose, of course, innovation is needed, and we actually experience it right now. I mean, our companies have invested in innovation for changing a natural gas boiler into a hydrogen gas boiler. There is Internet of Things. There is digitalization, which is innovation. There is the whole heat pump market is for our industry is an innovation path, and also within that technology there are new refrigerant technologies which have a lower global climate index than others. So there is innovation is a driver for our industry, but scale is almost as important. I mean, scale for us means also scaling up the competence of the installer network we have. This is a huge task for us to train 100,000 gas registers installers to different and new technologies, which require much more system knowledge than we have today, and that kind of scale is a big challenge for all of us.
Interesting point. If I could maybe add then as a follow-up, really, you mentioned digital, the revolution, if you like. I have a figure here, research by Statista into smart buildings across the EU. Total number of Internet of Things active connections is forecast to multiply 30 times over within a decade, so 5 million in 2016, 154 million by 2025. So a follow-up might be in this, you know, is smart the answer? Is everything going to be smart?
I'll go. I think my view of smart, and I think our business view of smart is, smart has been around for a long time. So I'm relatively new to this industry, but in previous industries it's been around. But it's only relevant when it actually provides a practical benefit to the consumer. And I think smart does have a place when it has and it's a bit like innovation, when innovation has a solution that makes a consumer's life easier. So most people will have an Amazon Echo, most people will have a smart speaker, people will have connected thermostats, etc. So I do think it will become part of the fabric of society, and certainly my children think of smart things very much as their natural go-to. So I think it does, but I think it must have a benefit for the consumer, otherwise it just becomes noise. And I think that's quite an important differentiation, and I think that's where smart will accelerate, when it makes people's lives easier rather than arduous. And I think that's where our focus is, in terms of what does it provide as a benefit.
That's a nice point, actually. Having just heard Greta Thunberg talk about blah, 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 there are mentions of smart which are arguably blah, blah, blah. We're just saying the words without any real understanding of the benefit that it'll bring to the industry or the end user. So the second question in this change section, we hear commentators ask, where's the Tesla or the Uber of the industry? Where's that real game changer that's going to alter the market irrevocably? So how are disruptors, individual companies or products or systems, how are they changing the market, and are they challenging the power of merchants? Have we got those game changers?
There are game changers, but there is no revolution. It is more an evolution in what we experience, and that comes maybe with the territory of our industry and the very local, traditional decision-making processes in our markets. But there is, of course, change, and we all experience it, and every company has its strategy in this change, and our strategy is to enable the installer to be part of that change, and that is difficult. In particular, the prices are being much more transparent, and the end user likes that, and we have to adapt as an industry to that. And the digitalization opens new opportunities, but also big challenges for the trade. And we are trying to partner with installers to get that challenge managed.
Could I maybe say, you know, every industry has those with vested interests in business as usual, because it's not working badly for them, they wouldn't vote for revolution. In terms of those who have the power currently, is there a dead hand on some of that change to a degree? Do we need a shake-up?
I think, you know, in the end, the interesting part around the heating industry is fundamentally, in the end, you need a skilled tradesman to install the equipment in your home. And when you talk then about how you get to that point that a decision is taken and what product, what appliance gets installed, upstream of that is what has been changing in the last couple of years. So there's no doubt that consumers are informing themselves a lot more, using the digitalization tools that they have, using information that is at their disposal. And then when the installer walks through the door and they invite several people in to quote, they're actually challenging the decision that he would take. And their influence over the decision-making process is much greater. But in the end, they can't buy that and get that product installed without that professional tradesman. And it's getting the balance right, as Klaus said then. So we want to facilitate that online, digital, educational decision-making process as much as we can, and then facilitate the installation as quickly and efficiently as possible. Consumers buying that online, paying that upfront, or trusting their local tradesmen, recommendations from friends, family, all of that is still happening, and you're getting it all blending together. But will you ever get to the point of the merchant disappearing out of the market? I don't think so, absolutely not, because you still need that distribution facility, you still need a product to get from A to B. An installer in the end, however the upstream sales process has gone, needs to buy a product, needs to hang it on the wall, and needs to connect all the pipes to it.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think if you if I go back to retailing in the previous life, you buy a product.
Yeah.
You don't buy a solution, you don't buy a technical option. Whereas in this sector, you are buying a technical solution through your installer. Now, how you're serviced and how the upstream works, but fundamentally, they're not just buying a product anymore. They will buy all of their bits through that merchant or distribution profile. And if you fast forward into the energy transition, actually, it becomes more than a boiler, and actually, it becomes far more technical. So although you want to enable the consumer to have choice, they're also making a choice on a very technical proposition, which means that they will also want somebody with professional advice, etc. I think one of the key areas that might change the industry is heat as a service. And actually, if you go down a leasing model, because that can completely change the automotive industry in terms of how people viewed and spent and financed their proposition. So I think that's probably one of the key changes. And whatever the solution being, depending on your building type, will also depend on the cost and the value of the technical solution in the future for the energy transition, which will drive you down certain routes as well.
Cool. And do you think, I mean, looking to other sectors and other industries, obviously they've developed and responded in different ways to COVID, be it food retail or automotive. There have been a whole range of different sectors that have had to adapt, some short term, and some have changed irrevocably forever. Do you think our sector's good at learning lessons from outside? Do you think it collects good ideas and uses them, or is it insular? Does it follow its own pattern?
I don't think so. I mean, also during the COVID time, we adapted and changed very fast. I mean, during the COVID year, we trained 22,000 installers, 50% of them online, and that will remain also in future. So there will be efficiency gains, also in the whole dealing with customers. People are used and accept now online meetings, which 3 years ago was not that common, and that will bring efficiency gains, and we see that already today.
And where you spoke earlier on about the use of smart technology, one of the potentials for that is then remote monitoring and remote diagnostics, and then making sure that the engineer technician who turns up to repair it is informed, got the parts necessary on the vehicle, and it becomes a much more efficient process than we often see today. Someone attends, diagnoses the fault, goes away, comes back 2 days later having secured the part. So I think that's where we'll see quite a bit of innovation in the future, and in many respects you could say the heating industry coming into the 21st century.
And more digitally enabled, and that brings us nicely, if you like, to the next section, and we've already touched on some of the component parts, but this is progress, but progress in the sense of culture, skills and training, and it'll be Nick starting us off in this, but for context, the TUC's just said 660,000 jobs will be a serious risk if the UK continues to lag behind other countries in funding towards net zero. And when I say lag, according to their figures, whilst the likes of the UK's allocated £2,960 per person, the UK Treasury budget is 180 quid. That is a big lag. So I provide that as context. So do we have, Nick, the skills and training required to, and it's about attracting and retaining talent we need for this 21st century industry?
I think fundamentally, at a macro level as a country, we don't have the right skill set, and as an industry and sector, no. I think if you look at the ageing population of the installer base, that's a real challenge, and the attractiveness of younger talent coming through. Certainly from our perspective, and I know that these gents will be doing very similar, I think we're all very much pushing to use our training facilities. You know, we do a lot of online training. We have worked with 17 regional colleges to try and bring the younger generations in. But I do think we are heading on a path at the moment without intervention from government into a sticky place with this, because you know we need to bring new skills into the industry and sector and make it attractive as well. Certainly through colleges and schools, and you know you chat to the current installer base, and they're very good at gas, but actually in the future you need people that are trained in electrical, in refrigerants, in gas steel, in hydrogen as well. So, and the technical capability, whether it be solar, PV, whether it be underfloor. So when you look at a home, it's a complete heating system as opposed to one element of it. So I think the transition and the speed of change will require a lot more influence from government as well as industry partners like ourselves. But it does need an injection of pace, because certainly at school level at the moment there isn't that appetite for mass people to come into this sector, and it's the same across a lot of the trades as well.
I'm a little bit old-fashioned, I'm afraid, in this regard. That I think we're now suffering the consequences of a country government strategy of trying to encourage 90% of the population to attend university courses, and we've devalued a trade, which is effectively what you were saying. Plumbing and heating, gas engineering is a practical engineering trade, and we undervalue the apprenticeship schemes, and we undervalue people who've got a trade, who've got a skill, and deploy that skill into the economy and into the workforce. So I think we are suffering the consequences of that, and actually a lot of that is reflected in the wider economy right now with HGV driver shortages, with shortages in every sector, because we've encouraged so many people to go to university, and then relied upon, as a consequence of Brexit now, lots of Eastern European talent coming into doing the jobs that we really didn't want to do, and now Brexit has left us with that great big gap, and we've got to fill that back now as a country and as an economy, and put value into trades and tradesmen and tradeships.
I would 100% agree, and I think we have to make it attractive, and maybe the transition we are in also helps us to increase the image of our trade and our industry.
Yeah.
So that could become attractive to young people to be in this trade, because it is an in subject we are in, and therefore I have hope that will help us to attract the right people. But the overarching problem, I think Carl described.
I mean, you anticipate nicely with the second question in this section, which, you know, it's about culture, really. I mean, to quote management guru Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You know, are the business models, the mindsets in place to modernise company culture? You know, do we have that kind of attractive 21st century workplace culture that will bring in a diverse new workforce and literally steal from other sectors, because it's a competitive market out there. You're competing with tech and other industrial sectors, and you will be looking potentially to win people from that. Do you think you have that culture?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because if you go back to 2019 and I look back at a culture back then, because that's before the world got flipped on its head, and I think certainly from our perspective there was a culture of apprenticeships coming through. I think then what you've seen in 2020 and 2021 is, through COVID, most cultures and most businesses have had to adapt and change, because everybody's had to become more flexible, which has meant society has shown a huge resilience in terms of how it changes. I think moving forward though, that cultural element is really important, about that flexibility and actually what you do around your organisation and your people, and I think that is there certainly from our organisation, because the reality of the flexibility in building in that resilience is your customers have had to change, your customers will continue to change, and what worked in the past won't work in the future. So it's this mindset of, you don't continuously have to change it, you have to keep a view on how the path is evolving in front of you. And I think that's really important for the sector, and I think certainly around getting new talent in and bringing people in, whether it be in engineering from an R&D perspective, technical quality, or from an apprenticeship levy, we've noticed that the skills and what we need to offer as an organisation and what people are looking for has dramatically changed, certainly in my 20 years of working in different industries. Graduates, apprenticeships, etc., you know, their expectations are a lot higher as well. And therefore I think the industry is keep evolving. But I think back to the previous point, it is about as well how you make it more attractive. And I think certainly as we talk about the energy transition, and I think about my young children, they're all about plastic in the ocean. They're very much aware of waste. You know, my 8-year-old will come home and talk about it. So you know that the next generation through will get it. It's the current generation and how we influence them and how important some of these things are, because they've not necessarily grown up with it. And that's the key bit, and that's the cultural bit coming through as well.
Yeah, I think in the last section we might look a little at how the industry is perhaps engaging with those narratives and how well it is doing that. But if I could just, a little bit of a provocation before we leave this maybe Nick, you're suggesting, you know, the industry is still potentially looking to government to give it that kind of backing to help bring in the numbers of bodies and the skills. And is there not a challenge for the industry to, you know, pick up the baton and be more dynamic? I mean, I know you're doing a lot, but if you say more needs to be done, can you wait on government? Can you trust them to do it in the timescale you need? Because you are the ones who are going to run out of the skilled people, not the government per se.
And Nick said earlier on, you know, we all do apprenticeship programs, we all do internship programs, we're all part of bigger European groups, and the investment that all of our organisations do in new talent is relatively high, but we need to do more and more and more as we push forward. And I think the whole COVID situation the cultures in our organisations have got us through the last 12, 18 months. Are our cultures going to evolve and change moving forward? Absolutely. Because for one thing, all of the home working that we've encouraged and all of our people and teams have done great work during this very difficult period to keep the companies running. Now they're expecting a bit of flexibility back, and actually, are we going to demand all our employees are back in the office 5 days a week whenever that situation arises? Probably absolutely not. You know, we are going to offer a great deal more flexibility. We, for one really good example from our side is from an after-sales point of view, we had a call centre located in Worcester. All the employees sat in one room. Now we're employing people from Land's End to John O'Groats because they don't need to physically sit in a specific location, which is not particularly good for the local Worcester economy, but for us, you know, it opens up employment opportunities right across the country. And part and parcel of that is giving people these flexible working contracts so that we are, in the end, we all have to remain attractive as employers, not only within the heating industry, but within the economy generally. And we've got to offer that flexibility to new incomes.
And do you think you're having the level of dialogue with your workforce and with your potential workforce and those in your supply chain? Are you, because in a nice way, the wider construction sector was not terribly good at listening historically. It was a lot of top-down systems imposed, whereas what you're describing is a much more collaborative and flexible way of working, which needs dialogue. Do you think you're talking, listening to everybody you can enough?
I think we do, and what Carl said, that the flexibility now we as an employer offer to our employees has changed dramatically over the last 2 years, and it needs to change to be attractive for these people. The work-life balance of the new generation has a different, it's more important to them than it was 20 years ago. So there is a change in culture, and we as employers have to adapt, and we do adapt, and luckily the technology helps us to maintain the service level and also actually increase efficiency in that context.
And I think that's key. Sorry, I think technology played a key part in COVID, certainly for us, because actually what you find now is that most people don't use a telephone because they're used to this interaction through a screen, because they pick up on social cues. So I know that certainly in our culture, like Worcester as well, and like Carl said, we mobilised a contact centre out of Warwick, but also what we found is that you created a lot of coffee mornings, get-togethers, a lot more social aspect without physical touching through the COVID, because actually everybody was at home, and therefore you created. So in times of crisis, they always say culture comes together, or it can, you know, it can go one way or the other. And certainly from a Baxi perspective, it's brought people a lot closer. And I find that the digital, people will speak to people using a Teams or a Zoom or whatever your business uses, because it gives a lot more when you see people's face, and therefore people can interpret. And I see that culture, it's this blended workforce is really important going forward. And I think it was earlier in your comment, sorry Carl, where you talked about will the industry change and is it traditional? Well, it has changed because it's not gone back to what it was fully, and I don't think it ever will. And I think that's important with all of our teams and how they interact with customers and everything else. So I think it is set to change.
Well, I was just going to add a small comment. Along with that come new challenges, and particularly around mental health issues and around isolation. You know, the office environment and seeing and interacting with other colleagues has been taken away from many people. So we've got to get that balance right now. But certainly we've seen quite an uptick in mental health issues, and how we support that and support our staff with that is a new challenge that has been accelerated as a consequence of COVID.
Give you an example of what the consequences can be, because 2 years ago we had a project to invest in our headquarters to extend it actually by 15 million. We scrapped that now because we changed it. We had parking problems.
Unfortunately, we built it. Now we've got an empty building.
So there are real consequences of the difference in how we work today. And but what Carl said is correct. There are a lot of communication issues also, not where when creativity and working together is required, then physical meetings are required. But transactional issues, transactional work, the new way of working is definitely helping.
Yeah, and just to add one more, there's an interesting challenge. Before I joined this meeting, I was sat next door talking to a welcome day we've got for the intern, the latest intern intake that we've taken, and it's really interesting talking to them, because we had to suspend some of those programs, because what's the point of providing work experience when you're working from home? And that presented again a whole new set of challenges, because part of the work experience is getting them to turn up on time, looking smart, and actually interacting with other people and deploying the soft skills and learning the soft skills that part and parcel of that is all about. So yeah, it has swings and roundabouts. But
one last quick question on this point. We've been talking obviously about changing the workforce, but a lot of these adaptability challenges are for management. So are you actually seeing changes in the makeup of senior management organisations? Are you at that level bringing in different voices to respond to new challenges and opportunities?
I think short term, we're still it's very soon afterwards. So, but I think certainly the culture of our leadership and our leadership teams, we're thinking about more on a mid-term basis, how we evolve it and how we change that. But good leaders will always adapt, but then we will be looking for new skills as we bring new leadership potential into the organisation.
Good stuff. Well, that takes us now to the fourth round, and this is the free-for-all, so just jump in. This is, I guess, reasons to be cheerful, and it's future gazing and looking forward up to a point, but it's growth. So we're talking about investment, we're talking about ambition, we're talking about voice. So to start with, we're constantly hearing about this wall of money that's available for low carbon technologies and sustainable solutions. So my first question is, can the sector actually secure the investment it needs, this is a business question, to fund its ambition? In short, can you get your hands on enough of that money?
This is the poised one.
I mean, every company has its own financial structure, and I can only say for our company, we are well funded. We are an old family-owned business, and we don't see any problem to fund the projects we need to fund in order to be part of the transition.
Yeah, similar answer from our point of view. We're part of another family-owned German business, and investment has always been a key pillar of the culture of the organisation. But I think, as Klaus says, I think collectively we as organisations have got access to that money. But like all organisations, they want to see a return on that investment, and we have to fight individually within our organisations for that. But I don't perceive a lack or willingness, but it's wanting to always invest the money at the right time and get the right returns.
I suppose to round the circle, we're 150 years old, we're a foundation, but so very similar. So investment isn't a challenge, but I think Klaus mentioned it earlier, this is a growth sector as well. So actually investment isn't the challenge for us, because the organisation recognises, I think it's about the speed and agility which we touched upon, to bring different types of technologies and solutions to market that service the complete proposition. And I think we will all have made educated decisions based on government white papers, pending government reports, pending legislation. So we've already invested as businesses, and certainly Baxi, but you can see it with the others, that everybody has made investments based on a suggestion, a intent by the government. So I think the challenge for us is we're making those investments. It's now really for the government to actually rubber stamp some of the things. Otherwise, I think what will happen is if the can proverbially gets kicked down the road, then all of us will be under pressure if suddenly legislation moves out another 4 or 5 years, because a lot of the investment, certainly from our side, is ready, and it's certainly aligned to the principles and the dates that we have today.
Sure. If I were to broaden then, as you suggest, to the sector as a whole, is the sector attractive enough to the investment community? You know, if we're talking about the kind of money that's coming out chasing, if you like, net zero, low carbon bling, it's chasing the sexy stuff. It's kind of hot cash for emerging technologies. Now, that might be short term, but is this the kind of sector that is actually attractive to those kind of emerging investors?
I think historically probably not, because you know, those types of investors typically look to move in and move out fairly quickly and get as the old saying goes, a fast buck. Whereas these are long-term investments, and as Klaus said, you know, we sell products that are in place for 15 years. But the evolution of that technology takes a lot of investment. And so we're working on much longer time cycles, I think, generally, than the normal investor markets. But we're in a really sexy area now, because decarbonisation, because dealing with these green challenges is going to be in vogue for so many different parts of our economy. And so I think we'll see a lot more external investment attracted potentially, but they are still long-term returns.
And it is needed, in particular downstream. And I think about the investments required to establish a hydrogen infrastructure.
Yeah.
That is a real challenge, I think, in the future, because we are ready. We just wait and have to bridge the time until the infrastructure is available. And that is important, and therefore, again, we need a clear political statement. This is the direction of travel, and then the investment will come.
I think you've already seen intent as well from investors. So investors are getting in at various parts of the funnel, and I think that will accelerate as you get more towards 2030, when you move from hypothesis into practical application or practical solutions to the legislation. So I think for the next 25 years, there's a huge amount of investment that will come into the sector, not just from the brands and the businesses that are here already, but certainly from outside. And I think that's going to be key, because otherwise that's the way that you're going to hit the 2050 target.
And that kind of anticipates nicely the final question, really, which, in a bit of context here, we've already had 3 different MPs in post as Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth. It's still only September, and if you saw the remit, it's as long as your arm, the things they have to cover. Even lobbyists are in a spin. So my question really is about, you've talked a lot about influencing government, perception, profile matters. Does the industry have the voice? Does it have the access to the channels, publicly and politically, to get its message across? Are you speaking loudly enough to the right people, effectively, as an industry?
Time will tell, I guess, is in the answer to that. I think we're all collectively very engaged in, we call it lobbying, don't we? But it's not really lobbying, is it? Through the various trade associations, we're engaging with government. We are really communicating to them the urgency that now needs to be taken. We're consulting with them on various concepts that they are talking to us about. So we are actively engaged, but I think still we suffer all of the time from a lot of movement within the political circle. People not in place long enough to really get a clear understanding of the market and the industry we operate in, and we find very frequently some of the ideas they come up with, you read them and you look at them and you say, really? How is that going to work in the supply chains that we operate? So I'd like to see a lot more consistency of senior politicians spending time in certain government remits.
No, I think we do have a channel. The question is, and we might not call it lobbying, we should call it enlightening. Because we are, because it's a complex subject. It is very, and it's not easy for non-traders to understand the complexity of our trade. But time will tell whether we are successful.
I think it's important, the bit about complexity, because we talk today about installers and we're talking about homeowners, but actually as a business, certainly from my side, we are operating in the commercial arena. You know, so if you then start to look at the commercial legislation and, you know, from an MP's perspective, the complexity and the route to market is very diverse.
Yeah.
And therefore for them to go, well, I think I get that bit over there and I can fix that, or I've got a solution for that. But when you then look at the different trade bodies and you look at the complete picture from an end-to-end solution, whether it be a house to a hospital, it becomes very different and the requirements are very, very different. And I think that's the other complexity, that you've got different parts moving at different pace. So I think that's the bit about how you tie all elements together as well.
But picking up then a little on actually what you said earlier, Nick, about the narrative around plastic in the oceans and the awareness amongst especially younger people and activist groups. To what degree is the industry speaking to that kind of narrative? So beyond the politicians, there is this public media agenda. And so it's not enough for the industry to be green, it has to be seen to be green. And some of the people you're wanting to attract into the sector may not know much about your position on these, may not understand where you are in that dialogue. So to what degree do you think, I mean, as an example, the plastic sector, under a lot of pressure obviously, demonising of single-use plastics, you see more and more of those manufacturers now actively trying to talk direct to customers and end users, because going through the channels of retail or bodies is too diffuse, so they're no longer confident that their message is going to get across, and they're feeling the pressure from that media debate. So to what degree do you think the onus is on the likes of you guys in the industry to take a more active role and be more direct to consumer in the wider market?
I think it's really important. I think certainly as well there is a lot of noise out there that is not constructive noise as well. It's not helpful. It can be quite focused on one technology. And I think certainly our view is at the moment a lot of it is around education. How do you help people on the journey? And I know certainly obviously I read a lot of the articles from these gents companies as well. I think we're all in a similar place where we're trying to educate that actually rather than go it's about this brand or this brand, it's the holistic approach of going these are the solutions and this is how we should go to market, because then you start to get people thinking not about a brand or a product but about the bigger solution. And I think that's our responsibility as well, because then you start to cut down the noise of jumping down a rabbit hole of a particular type or a particular brand. And I think that's important because there is a lot of confusion out there. You know, chatting to some of the installers, they're going, is it this, what does this mean, is this coming? And I think sometimes the media hasn't helped us with the famous one of the banning of gas boilers, you know, in new build by 2023 or 4 by Boris' statement, which actually then confuses everybody because it's not got context around it. So I think context is really important in this arena.
And generally, we'll all come under pressure as individual organisations and companies to demonstrate our green credentials, so to speak. And customers, in coming to that brand decision, will start to pay more and more attention to all of our sustainability credentials. So it will start to rise to the surface, I think. But I think the other element of it, as Nick was just saying, is really about how many times do we get asked, well, is it heat pumps or is it hydrogen or is it gas boilers? The future is a mixture of all of those things. And we've come from a world of almost a single homogeneous solution in natural gas to a future that has a lot more diversity of technology in it. Whether a certain technology wins 20, 30 years time from now, time will tell. But I think the future is a much more diversified technology landscape as we all try and deal with these challenges of climate change, which are real, and we have to deal with it.
I'm recognising the very positive sentiments you're saying in terms of intention of collaborating better to get across this more blended message, but it will also require literally investment in terms of time and money, because often the money relates to a product launch, a brand, a thing, and the budget is very tightly connected to that. The kind of messaging you're describing, collective messaging, does also require time and money to be budgeted. Can you see your sector doing more than nodding and taking a more active role and pooling resources to that degree, or is that a step further down the line?
One of the actions I'm going to take after today is I'm going to appoint a new director of enlightenment. But it's always getting that balance right, isn't it? I mean, we spend a lot of time individually and collectively in all sorts of industry engagement. I think probably in the next decade we're going to have to intensify that as we get into this debate. Then the solutions will start to become obvious and then it'll all settle back down. But we have a role and a responsibility to play in all of that, and I think as individual companies we do, but collectively as an industry with the trade associations we participate in, we're fully engaged and we're ready, willing, able and determined to do our thing in terms of advising government, trying to direct them in the right direction. But the most important thing is what I said right at the start, we've got to start acting and doing.
And ultimately then one final question, because we're about out of time, and this is almost an unfair one. You're here at the Leaders Summit, so it's going to be a question about leaders. So maybe if we walk it down the table, what is, so lucky, Nick,
That's fine.
but what is the role of a leader in your sector coming out of this period we've described and dealing with these challenges and opportunities? What is important for leadership for you?
I think it's twofold. I think it's you have to look at the internal and external environment. So you have to think about your culture internally and what you're doing and how you involve your team. And Carl talked a lot about mental health, and I think that's affected a lot of organisations. So I think it's about how you adapt your own organisation and how you create that culture there. And then I think externally, I think we do have a responsibility. You know, at the end of the day, 2050 is coming. We can actually make a change to the majority of people's lives by the decisions that we make and how we go about our organisations, and also about how we educate people. So I think for me it has two styles to it, the leadership profile, and that's very much developing the talent within, whether it be apprentices, whether it be internships, graduates, etc. But then also the evolution externally as well, and actually how we help the Joe Blogg's consumer understand what it means to them in the future.
Carl, leadership for you at this point going forward?
For me, trying to keep it short, it's having clear clarity of purpose and a clear vision of how we're going to tackle these challenges moving forward, what our role and place is within the industry and within the marketplace, and motivating our teams to deliver.
Yeah,
Klaus, final word to you.
I can agree to all what has been said. Leadership in these days for us and for me is very much also a personal style, right? And to give the organization you're responsible for the safety and security they needed in this crisis situation. And from here, we have to set the goals and manage the transition, and that in a cooperative way. That's at least my style, and I think that will help us to win the future.
Excellent. So what I'm hearing then in conclusion is you're going to adapt and educate with clarity and motivation, but also safety and security to manage the transition with success towards 2050.
Seems like a good conclusion.
Yes.
That's a plan, we're agreed there. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much to all our leaders, Carl, Klaus and Nick. A reminder to check out Installer, installeronline.co.uk, essential reading and viewing for heating, plumbing and renewables professionals. You'll find full diary events on the website, upcoming festival dates, news, views, videos galore, lots of infotainment. So that's it for today. I've been Jim McClellan, editor at SUSMEME. A huge thank you once again to the three of you for fielding these questions so openly and frankly at a time of great opportunity for the sector. And alongside the InstallerSHOW, September 2021. We'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.